Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 140. 140, right, Bill? Is that what we came up with a minute ago?
Yes, sir.
140 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. Got Bill Sutton with us. Bill was in, I say you're part of the world last week on vacation. Sounds like you guys knocked out a podcast while I was gone. What did you guys cover?
We didn't, Bill. I think we last week we had. Did we?
It was a week before. It was a week before.
Yeah, it was a week before. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
we did.
What was it? I haven't had a chance. Well, I haven't posted it, so I haven't even heard.
This was the last. This was part. I think this was part 4. This was part 4 of our final our big overview of 2305.
2305. Anything stick out that you guys covered? Did you remember?
Well, I was at the beach. So I did not get to sit in on that one, unfortunately.
Well, hopefully people got a lot of good value out of that whole series. It took us four episodes to cover 2305. I think that's just a highlight that a lot of people are saying that Citrix is dead and they're not investing, and I think it's the exact opposite. And I think, Geremy, I think you guys have a problem over cloud software groups getting that word out, because obviously you're kind of getting back to basics, what we need you to do, but a lot of FUD around. Yeah.
So the myth that there's not things happening is truly a myth, because there's a lot going on right now. Lots being released, and actually it's happening at a quicker clip too. So maybe it's just a messaging thing. I'm not sure, but holy smokes, I get updates internally all the time on feature releases. Obviously they happen in the cloud all the time. The things that tend to make the big release on the blogs or the big quarterly releases we do on-prem. But yeah, there's a lot going on.
Well, that's the voice of Geremy Meyers. Geremy is the director for, I call it sales engineers. What's the official title for those guys these days, Geremy?
It's partner technical strategist. And essentially we are sales engineers and we focus on partners and their customers.
Yeah. And that's how you relate to us. And of course we're kind of all over the place, US, Canada, India, but because of our presence as a partner, you're here with us quite often.
Quite frequently. Yep.
You get to hear all my things, is what I'll call them.
I wish I could scale myself. I wish I could do sort of an automatic scaling of my time too, because that'd be fantastic too. That's a good lead in, I would say, to this topic.
It is. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Today's blog by Mark Mueller came out like 5 days ago, bringing the power of Citrix Autoscale to on-premises. I think that was part of the 2305 stuff, and I'm sure we spent a few minutes on it, but today we're going to dive into it deeper. Help us by setting this up, Geremy. Where did Autoscale come from? What does it apply to when you take, like we were just talking about, taking you and auto-scaling you up? That'd be awesome, but taking some elements of things and auto-scaling them may not be as awesome. What's autoscale historically mean in the Citrix world?
So it started as a feature, I want to say back in 2019. Heck, the article goes into it here. It was a feature we introduced in our cloud console, 4 years ago, that was focused on managing workloads primarily in the cloud. So first of all, understand the cloud console can manage on-prem, but it was a feature that was a part of the cloud. And if I had to argue, it's probably meant initially just to manage costs in the cloud. So, spinning up workloads, spinning down workloads in like an Azure, an AWS, or Google, specifically to help make, just reduce the spin in the cloud for machines that don't need to be running. So
and
that was kind of the idea.
That's spinning up when you need more capacity and spinning down when you don't need it. Because help me out with this, between you and Bill. When I've got the machine sitting there in my cloud, even when it's not turned on, I'm paying for something, aren't I?
You are. So you're paying for storage. You're paying for not necessarily compute, that side of it, but you're definitely paying for storage as well. So, that's a big piece of it. You're paying for disks that are sitting idle for sure.
Bill, have we had any projects where this either scaling up or scaling down or both became part of the requirements?
Yes, absolutely. To help to what Geremy said earlier, in the sense that it helps control the spend, the ability to spin machines down when they're not in use, to even deallocate them if they're non-persistent. We can completely deallocate them, which essentially eliminates any sort of storage costs. And then there's some other features that are not related to Autoscale that can help with cost as well. They may be related, but they're not included in this article, like changing the machine type or the disk type and those sorts of things.
Right. And so the article here in the first paragraph talks about 50% of the customers used it in the DAS, in the cloud-based version of the platform. And the ones who reported back said that they saved 70% or more on the cost of running their desktops. Those are pretty compelling numbers.
Yes, very much so.
You know what? And it's a part of the delivery group configuration, and it's easy to miss, right? So even though there's a button that says Manage Autoscale right in the configuration, a lot of folks miss it. The thing that threw me off was, we've only got, I guess when we originally introduced this, only 50% of our customers were using it. Man, it's an easy one. You already got it. Turn it on.
Mm-hmm. So I've had lots of conversations recently, and some of the things I've been doing around persistent versus non-persistent. I've probably brought up on this podcast a couple of times. Is this limited to the non-persistent world, or can I do persistent workloads with autoscaling?
You can do it, but it's really more power management at that point, because you're really just spinning up workloads that just aren't being used. But initially, the idea was more for non-persistent, so creating a buffer of machines. So you want to obviously at the end of the day make sure you had machines available for folks to connect to. But I think initially it was more from a non-persistent perspective.
Right. I mean, if you go back a few years, Citrix had what I think was originally called in the on-prem world power management, which did some of this, and this is an expansion, significant expansion of this to address the needs in the cloud, particularly around cost and capacity. And now it looks like what they're doing, what they have done, is bringing it back to the on-prem world. Kind of the marching orders I think that Citrix has this year is to be consistent across all delivery methods, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's on-prem. And this brings it back, a lot of the features and functionality that were in the cloud to the on-prem world.
Well, let's make that transition, because I was talking, non-persistent versus persistent.
Right.
If I've got my own data center, or maybe I've got a hosted data center by a partner like XenTegra,
right,
what is the ability to do this outside of the DAS world? In other words, not the platform as a service, but now to do it in my own desktop as a service, which could be cloud enabled, could be on premises, could be both. Why does it matter to me?
So we've had this debate, probably on this podcast a few times, which is, I always thought that, is this really relevant on-prem? Do we have, for the most part, I'm buying hardware in my data center. It's a sunk cost, right? So I've already procured it, right? So I don't necessarily need to manage the cost. At least that's where I originally came to it is, so if I've already got the hardware, if I'm already provisioning the hardware, do I still need it? And one of the things we landed on is, listen, even if it wasn't from a cost perspective, listen, there's an environmental footprint we should be considering too, right? Because data centers cost power, and the more things you have running, that two different perspectives. One, running things and providing power requires, money. At the same time, you're just trying to be a little socially responsible.
Yep.
Again, reduce your footprint.
And there's still a cost involved, right? If I use Uber, car as a service, there's still a cost involved. What if I could make that cost less by, making the Uber driver's gasoline more efficient, and then maybe that cost passes down to me, even though either I use my own car, which would be a direct result, and even if I use it as a service, there's impacts all across the board. Bill, sorry, you were going to say something?
I was just going to kind of come along with what Geremy said. I mean, data centers, co-location facilities, they make money by leasing space and providing power. So the less power you consume, in theory, you would presume that you would have less cost. And by spinning down machines at scale, then that could have a significant impact.
Yeah. There's an aggregate involved, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you factor in, like Geremy pointed out, the social responsibility of, turn your lights off.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they call out 4 key features of Autoscale as it relates to 2305, which is the on-premises version, which, by the way, you can get if you have a partner like XenTegra host it. We can host it with the on-prem version. We just host it for you. That way you might end up with the best of both worlds. First one here, Geremy, is schedule-based and load-based settings. What does that mean?
So things number one is you can define when your working hours are. This is very similar to power management and how that worked in the past. Where you set times a day when you've got folks who are going to be in the office, or obviously you don't want someone to log in, click a button, and have to wait for virtual machines to spin up, right? So if you can anticipate the time of day, then that's a pretty good start. And you can define how many machines you want running at peak hours. And then secondly, you can go through and say, hey, number one, I want this many running at peak and this many running off peak. So there's that. But you can also define, and this is where the load-based settings come from, is you can also define, what kind of buffer do you want to make available as well. So for instance, I'll use easy math here. If I want to do a 10% buffer and I've got 10 machines running, you're always going to have an 11th one, or you're going to have 10% above that available just in case, you just say you happen to max out. Let's add a little capacity just in case, but it'll be very dynamic as you go. So you can define an on-peak and an off-peak buffer as well.
Bill, anything to add to that?
Nope, he covered it well.
So Bill, we'll go to you for the next one, dynamic session timeouts.
So this is the old timeouts that we would set, I think, in GPOs, where we would say, if you're idle for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, go to a disconnected state. And then if you're disconnected for 30 minutes, your session gets recycled. Yeah. So here they're allowing it to be a little bit more dynamic in terms of setting differences between peak and off peak to allow the drain of the server to occur in a more timely manner. At least that's how I read it. Geremy, am I on the right track?
No, you've nailed it there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you said no. I thought, oh my gosh. So.
Well, so you're saying our users may or may not, turn the lights off when they leave the room. We'll allow the room to stay lit for a little bit, but then we'll go back and turn them off when it's the right time.
Yeah, and we can set different timeouts based on whether it's during the workday or whether it's off peak hours.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so my kids don't turn the light off when they leave the room, but what's funny is, I think most of us, at least when I, if I'm done with my machine, a lot of times what they'll do is I'll just X out of it, which just throws it in a disconnected state, which honestly is probably the default behavior for most people. They're not going, necessarily to start, run, or start, shut down, or disconnect, or whatever. They're just hitting the X. And so that leaves the machine running, and that plays into this, right? So if you can maybe set a session timeout that changes depending on peak hours, makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think what we're really saying here is what's good for the cloud is also good for your data center. The cloud is just somebody else's machines. In this case, it's your machines. Some of those same concepts, even though we quite often just took them for granted in the past, those concepts apply today. Yeah. Exactly. So Geremy, I'll go back to you for this one. Autoscale, tagged machines, cloud burst, and hybrid.
So the one thing that I always forget is what we've reintroduced into the on-premise, architecture is the ability to connect out to a cloud, for workloads. So for instance, for a while there, I would say argue maybe a year or two, what we pulled from the on-premise product is the ability to create a hosting connection out to a cloud, right? So, or better yet, if you're hosting all of this infrastructure in a cloud, so again, not using Citrix Cloud, where we've got the management components that we're hosting, but you're setting up DDCs and SQL servers and all those pieces up in the cloud. Long story short, creating a hosting connection to a cloud is something we've reintroduced. So what is not unusual is, having a single instance with workloads in a cloud, maybe sitting in a colo, maybe sitting in your data center. And the idea that I would like to be able to define what types of machines participate in the auto scaling process. So you can tag machines and then say, hey, I only want to allow maybe my on-premise machines to be the burstable machines versus like say the cloud or vice versa, whatever kind of makes sense. But now you can tag machines and define which types of machines based on that tag will participate in the bursting, if you will.
Yeah. So I don't know how well you guys know like the Azure solutions for this, but this seems pretty robust.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to do it in both the cloud platform as well as the on-premises platform seems to be quite conducive to being successful.
So for someone who doesn't do a lot of, we have a team environment, we work with it, but I don't have 5,000 machines to spin up and down and see some of these things in action on a consistent basis. And I kind of forget how much tagging is such a big deal. So creating machines in Azure, being able to tag those, creating things in Citrix and tagging those. Once you do it a handful of times, you go, oh man, this makes sense. Let's go retag everything. But tagging has become not just from a management perspective, but a lot of times that's how folks are charging back to the business is based on tags. But now we can tag those or leverage those as well.
Yeah, we're leveraging the tags to decide what we want to burst and what we don't want to burst versus trying to create a bunch of delivery groups or something that's segmented in a different way. We don't have to create a sprawl to do what we need to do here.
Yeah, as you guys were talking about this, right? I've got my LG unit running iGel connected to my virtual desktop, and I just sitting there letting it run. wasn't hurting me, so I just let it keep going. Bill, user notifications.
Log off notifications. This has been around for a while, but it's essentially notifying the user when you're getting ready to force off a linger session. So if the session has been inactive for a certain period of time, we can send a custom notification and then force log off the session. This is something that we've had for a while, but especially in the cloud. But this expands the Autoscale functionality to enable it there as well.
And then Geremy, it covers some of the technical platform support information. Can we just hit these real quick?
For starting. So what are we hosting on? Citrix, we'll say Xen server, but AWS, Google Cloud, all the standard resources, right? So it doesn't really matter what you're hosting on. That's less important. And of course, the old OS types, we'll do multi-session, Xen app, if you will, Xen desktop. I will point out that depending on what the delivery type is, like I said earlier, there is no quote unquote power management anymore. It falls under Autoscale. Right. If you're doing this with dedicated desktops, it'll just be straight power management. If you're doing this with non-persistence, you'll get a few more options. Like for instance, do you want to, especially on a multi-session type, do you want to scale vertically or horizontally? Always an important question. So that's one thing that you might miss if you're looking at a persistent desktop type. But we support just about everything.
Hey, Jimmy, the one that's missing here, supported VDA hosting plat is Nutanix. I assume it's in there as well.
It would work the same way. Yeah, exactly the same way. Yep.
So what I would call out with this is you've got, Citrix Hypervisor, Nutanix, VMware, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. That would be a multi-cloud hybrid strategy. That's why it's so important that we do this not only for the DAS version, but the on-premises version, because people are going to need that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now it is abstracted from the underlying. So I like that it called out that it's supported, but this feature is pretty much extracted or abstracted from the underlying hypervisor. So it'll work with anything you connect to it.
Yeah. So the next section goes back to what we kind of talked about a little bit, which is how does Autoscale improve my on-premises deployments? Let's kind of talk about that just kind of conceptually. What are they trying to call out here?
I think they were talking a lot about what we've already talked about, as you said. Particularly in the middle of this section, the idea of previously leveraging on-prem data centers. We would provision them to allow 24/7 access, and the resources are always available, sitting there running. In theory, obviously that was great for the user, but we're keeping the resources powered on and incurring costs and complexity and so forth. And so leveraging Autoscale allows us to be a lot more granular than we were able to be in the past, more akin to what we see in the cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting as well is we actually bubble up an estimated cost savings into Director now, right? So if you go look within the Director console, you're looking at your dashboard, you'll see machine usage, and over on the right, we're actually sort of trying to calculate that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Bill, that you caught that caught you interest, that you sounded interested in. Why does that matter?
I had not seen it before now. So I just find it interesting that we're actually just like you would do in the cloud, Citrix has got the ability to say, we're saving you X by powering things down. I'm sure there's some metrics in the background that go along with this in terms of how it's calculated, but nevertheless, to be able to do that for on-prem resources, I think is interesting.
Geremy, can you control those variables? Do you know, and just kind of tune it in for your environment?
I think so. Actually, I'm actually in my cloud console now, and I want to say you could define how much the cost. I can't remember if it's at the delivery group level or within Autoscale itself. I'll have to go back and look, but I think you can define what that looks like.
Well, and that's it, right? We're all in IT to deliver apps, including the desktop, to our users and help them be productive. At the same time, we got to be able to justify the cost of all this stuff, and having something that at least gives us some semblance of the money that's being saved, extremely valuable.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, it's good to be back with you guys. Geremy, any additional things you'd like to add about the idea of auto scaling, or just what Citrix is up to in general?
Well, I'll say this. This goes back to things that are making it on-prem. Part of what helps facilitate this is the fact that now we do have the web console that's been a part of the cloud for many iterations now, at least 2 or 3 years. That's on-prem now. So that MMC has been retired. Going forward, you'll want to leverage, and I think it might even be the default now, is the web console for on-prem. So, much needed refresh even for the UI. Makes it on-prem.
Bill, I'm sure you're devastated to lose yet another MMC console.
Oh, no, not devastated at all. No, RIP.
RIP. That was, what? I remember when that came out in the year 2000. That reminds me of a Conan skit, by the way. In the year 2000. Anyways, long story short, MMCs came out. I thought they hung the moon. And it's just funny how they feel dated now.
Well, the other thing I would add to this is because it's a web-based console, you could partner with Citrix and host it in the cloud. Yeah. You could do it in your own data center. Yeah. And you could also do it with another partner like us. And you would still be able to access it because you're just using standard web protocols, web security.
Right.
That's extremely powerful and flexible and useful all at the same time. Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, thanks. Geremy, we spoke earlier this morning. We're going to be doing a podcast on ServiceNow and Citrix. Looking forward to that one. I think it's such an exciting place to be heading with the business.
I'm pretty fired up about that. So I know on 2 or 3 different occasions, we've talked about how REST APIs are just sort of a requirement in the cloud now, just so the different product stacks can integrate easily. And so, that's what we're going to hit on. There's an ITSM adapter that hooks into ServiceNow, and there's a lot of cool things that we can do as a part of that integration. So we'll get to hit on that here pretty soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, I appreciate it, and look forward to doing it again next week.
All right. Thanks.
All right, guys. See you, Bill. See you, Andy.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Yep.